Okay, so we are back here now. It is 12 o'clock, and we are continuing our second class today of an ongoing daily classes, Torah classes in memory and honor of my father-in-law, Mendy and Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan. I want to thank everybody that is continuing to staying on, to listen to these amazing Dvar Torahs, and B'ezrat Hashem, they should also impact you in every single way possible to give you guys some chizuk and light, and B'ezrat Hashem continue to give a higher elevation to the neshama of Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan. I am very excited to present our second speaker, Rabbi Yossi Marlow. Rabbi Marlow, who's been a family friend for many years, was also a person very close to Mendy, knew him very, very well. And it's only appropriate that he can be giving a class of Dvar Torah in honor of his name. The rabbi is the rabbi based Menachem in North Miami Beach. And B'ezrat Hashem, Rabbi, we are looking forward to your amazing words of Torah. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Michael. Of course, this class is Le'ilu Nishmas, the elevation for the soul of Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan, who passed away. Of course, we remember him so clearly, a wonderful person. He lived a very spiritual life, and his neshama is certainly very happy with what is being done, what is being arranged, classes, learning, more Torah, more mitzvahs in his memory. I was asked to speak about Shemini Atzeret, or Shemini Atzeret. You know, there are various different accents. So when I say the words, maybe I should say it every way now, and like this, automatically you'll apply whatever your accent is, whatever is applicable. So Shemini Atzeret, Shemini Atzeres, and everything in between, which is basically the 8th day from the beginning of Sukkah, is the birthday of Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan. And I was asked to discuss the significance of that day because there's obviously a connection with the yahrzeit and the birthday of Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan. So we'll do the best we can in this limited time frame. So we'll try to be informational and inspirational. Which one will be more of, I don't know, time will tell. We'll just try our best. Shemini Atzeret, of course, is a very, very beautiful day, befitting for the very beautiful person who is born on Shemini Atzeret. But what is Shemini Atzeret? Shemini is the number 8, the 8th day. So there's a whole struggle in the Talmud, tractate Sukkah, where there's a whole question whether or not one sits in the Sukkah, one makes a bracha, one doesn't sit in the Sukkah because it's a separate holiday. If it's a separate holiday, why is it the 8th day? If it's not the separate holiday, then why is it a day when we make a shechiyan? So there are various different details, but we'll start with Shemini Atzeret in Eretz Yisrael is also Simchas Torah. So when we say Shemini Atzeret only, it refers to outside of Eretz Yisrael, outside of Israel. If we say Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, then it's a combination, and that combination is in Eretz Yisrael. However, this is a simcha that starts in the beginning of the holiday of Sukkot, beginning of the Yom Tov of Sukkot, and it reaches its zenith, it reaches the height of simcha during Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. And we know that it's obviously one of the happiest days, if not the happiest day of the year. And the question is, question number 1 that we'll begin with, why was it designed that the Torah should be concluded on Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in Eretz Yisrael, or Simchat Torah over here? But why is it that on that day we conclude and begin reading the Torah, when in fact it would make more sense to do so on Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year? If you're not going to conclude it on Shavuot when the Torah was given, at least do it on Rosh Hashanah. the beginning of the year? This question is asked actually by the Levush, and the Levush answers that we do various different things on Rosh Hashanah to confuse the Satan, to confuse the Satan. That's why the day before Rosh Hashanah, we don't sound the shofar. We don't mention Rosh Chodesh, actually, on Rosh Hashanah. We do certain things to confuse the Satan, the prosecutor of the Jewish people, for him not to be sure that it's Rosh Hashanah, and therefore he will not prosecute. One of the ways of confusing the Satan is by not reading, by not concluding the Torah then, because we are making it less conspicuous. We're making it more inconspicuous that today is the beginning of the year, the day of judgment. Incidentally, others say that the reason why we don't conclude the Torah on Rosh Hashanah is because we want the parsha Kisava, the parsha of rebuke / curses, to be completed before Rosh Hashanah. We want all of the curses, the year and its curses, the negative parts, to be concluded and done with by the time Rosh Hashanah begins. And therefore, we are separating the parsha of Kitavo, which has rebuke and curses, with another parsha of Nitzavim and Vayelech before Rosh Hashanah, to start the year fresh, curse-free, blemish-free on every level. That is, one of the reasons why we don't conclude the Torah and begin the Torah by Rosh Hashanah. Another question, while we're at it, if we're talking about Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, why is it that we take out all of the Torahs from the Ark and we dance with them around the bima? We surround the bima with the Torah. That's why it's called Hakafot. Hakafa means we're surrounding. Normally, if you have, let's say, a bride, a groom, if you have a chassan and a kala, normally people dance around them. They are the significant ones of the day. So the significant one of the day should have its attention being focused on it. It's the center of the circle. You dance around him or her or it, depending on what the situation is, what you're celebrating, and that's the way it is normally done. Over here, it's done in the other way. Over here, you're taking the Torah, which we are celebrating, and you're dancing with it around the bima. What's going on over here? What's the significance of taking the Torah and surrounding, dancing around? We'll address that a little bit later. Another thing we will address is Shemini Atzeret. Why is it called Atzeres or Atzeret? It means hold back. What do you mean hold back? So the Medrash says it's comparable. It's like Hashem telling the Jewish people, please hold back. Kosha olai pridaschem. Your departure is difficult for me. Please hold back one more day. Let's celebrate one more day before you depart. And like this, we'll be able to celebrate for another day. And the obvious question is, what is, the inevitable is going to happen. What does it really help? You're bonding another day. Okay, so you're actually making it more difficult to depart the next day. You're just creating more havoc. You're creating more of an emotional difficulty toward the inevitable departure. And the inevitable departure will take place. So delaying the departure doesn't necessarily resolve the issue. And if it doesn't resolve the issue, what is the point of delaying? It's kind of pointless. So we'll discuss this as we go on. But let's start first by discussing the Shemini Atzeret in the Talmud. The Talmud says on Sukkah, page Mem Vav 46, side B, the Gemara deals with the issue of dwelling in the Sukkah on the 8th day. Over here, we're talking about 8th day in diaspora. and it could be treated as though it may be the seventh day of Sukkot. Just like any other holiday has 2 days, we're not sure if it's the first day or the second day, and we treat them both as day one, since we're unsure, or since we are perpetuating a custom of keeping 2 days, being that in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the temple, people were unsure what the calculations were, so we keep with that particular minhag outside of Eretz Yisrael. So when it comes to Sukkot, we have the same dilemma to a certain degree when it comes to Shemini Atzeret, or maybe perhaps an extra, additional dilemma. What is the additional dilemma? So Omar Rav Yehuda Bereida Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas Mishmei de Rav. Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas, says in the name of Rav, Shmini Sofek Shvi'i, the 8th day, which is possibly the 7th day. In other words, there's a dilemma. Is it really the 8th day, or is it the 7th day of Sukkot? Right? What is it? Shvi'i l'Sukkah is treated as the 7th day for Sukkah, Ushmini l'Bracha, and the 8th day regarding Yom Tov blessings. So what does it mean? Basically, to sit, to dwell in the Sukkah, we're treating it as if it's still the 7th day, and we dwell in the Sukkah. But when it comes to making a new Bracha, Shehechiyanu, we treat it as if it's the 8th day, and we make a Shehechiyanu. So like we kind of have a little bit of an oxymoron going on over here. Is it the 8th day or the 7th day? So we treat it as both. On the one hand, we dwell in the Sukkah, because it may be the 7th day, and on the other hand, we say the bracha, in other words, the Shehechiyanu, but we don't make the bracha leishe basukah. We don't make a bracha to dwell in the Sukkah. We treat it as if it's the 8th day. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan says, Shmini lezer. No, you treat the day as if it's the 8th, both not to have to dwell in the Sukkah, and we obviously don't make the bracha leishe basukah, and we treat it, we make say all the prayers for the Shemini Atzeret / Shehechiyanu. Okay, so the Gemara now will sort of enhance the dispute. Mesev. So when it comes to dwelling in the Sukkah, Kula alma loy plige, no one argues the Yasfina, that we actually dwell in the Sukkah. Everyone says that we dwell in the Sukkah. Because it may be the 7th day of Sukkot. And Tosfos over here asks, if that's the case, if you want to treat it like Sukkot, go all the way. Don't have you can't you can't be a little bit pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not. It can't be a little bit Sukkot. Either you dwell in the Sukkah and you make a bracha on the lulav, or you don't do any. And if you're doing the sukkah, if you're eating in the Sukkah, why not make a bracha on the lulav? So Tosfos answers, over here, the problem is, if you're going to take the esrog and the lulav, here you're clearly showing that it's Sukkot. And you're potentially degrading or diminishing the significance of Shemini Atzeret, versus if you're just sitting in the Sukkah. Many people like the Sukkah. They like the outdoor weather. They like the wonderful, cool, non-humid weather of a place called, let's say, Miami or other places, and they continue to sit in the Sukkah. So if they like that, they may continue, so it's not so conspicuous. They're doing it only for the sake of Sukkah, and therefore it's not considered a blatant disrespect toward Shemini Atzeret. So now, if that's the case, we do end up only eating in the Sukkah, but we don't make a blessing on the lulav. We don't take the esrog and the lulav on that day. So everyone agrees that we dwell in the Sukkah on the 8th day, according to the Gemara over here. Keep ligay. When do they actually disagree? The disagreement is only in the following case. Libruche, when it comes to making a bracha, making a blessing. Leishe basukkah, the blessing we make when it comes to sitting in the sukkah. Laman de Omar Shvi'i l'sukkah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, according to Rav, basically, who says that the 8th day in diaspora is treated as the 7th day when it comes to Sukkah. Baruchi nami mevarchinon. We also make a bracha. We would make a bracha. But Laman da Omar Shemini Atzeret, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it is the 8th day, Baruchi lo mevarchinon. We also do not make a bracha. So far, so good. That's what the Gemara is saying, just to give an idea that it's not so simple. Do we sit in the sukkah or not? Do we make a bracha or not? So we'll get to the conclusion in a moment. But this is just for general information, because many times people, Shemini Atzeret is here, we're either preparing for Hakafes, dancing with the Torah, Simchas Torah, but we're not paying attention to the details. There are some people who actually eat in the sukkah Shemini Atzeret as well, and there are some people who do not. And some people eat in the sukkah without making a bracha. There are various different customs amongst Hasidim and amongst non-Hasidim. Amongst Hasidim themselves, you have different customs. Some do, some don't. And amongst the Lithuanians, you also have the Gra, just to point out, just to bring out, the Gra, the Vilna Goyen, would not only eat in the sukkah, he would actually sleep in the sukkah as well, which is an interesting thing, because eating in the sukkah, you could make a distinction by not making a bracha. So you could show that it's Shemini Atzeret, but sleeping in the sukkah, there's no bracha on the sleeping. There's no specific bracha. So over here, there's more of a dwelling in the sukkah going on. Yet he would do it because there's no bracha. So there's no question of being able to sleep in the sukkah and Shemini Atzeret. Most people don't do that, but the Vilna Goyen, for instance, would do it just to, make things a little more colorful. Bring a rainbow over here. And we'll mention rainbow actually soon. So the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, Nekoit de Rabbi Yochanan biyodech. The ruling of Rabbi Yochanan is what should be taken firmly, is what should be established. In other words, it's considered the 8th day for everything. No sleeping, no dwelling in the sukkah, rather, no eating in the sukkah, and no bracha. Why? I'll prove it with a story. Rav Huna bar Bizna v'chol gedoylei hadoid iklo b'sukkah b'shmini sofek shvi. Because Rav Huna bar Bizna and all of the great men of the generation visited the sukkah on the 8th day, which was possibly the 7th day. And nevertheless, Mesav Havu Yosvi, they sat in the sukkah, in other words, they dwelt in the sukkah, Baruchi lo mevarchi, but they didn't make the blessing. So the Gemara is going to challenge it. What do you mean they didn't make a blessing? Maybe v'dilma svira lehu kamanda omar kevan shabeirach yom tov rishon shuv eina mevarach. Maybe the reason why they didn't make a blessing is not because they treat it like the 8th day. Maybe they treat it in full like the 7th day, unlike Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe it's really the 7th day. And the reason why they didn't make a blessing is because we learned earlier that there's an opinion that says once you make a bracha, day 1, on the sukkah, you don't make a bracha for the rest of the days. They treat it like, let's say you're wearing tefillin. If you wear tefillin, even if you're wearing tefillin the entire day, today is Wednesday, Yud Beis Tishrei. Let's say you're deciding to wear tefillin the entire Wednesday until the evening. How many times do you make a bracha? You make a bracha only once, even though you're going to, let's say, take it off and put it back on, take it off, put it back on. He treats it as if you're in one continuous mitzvah. Once you make the bracha on the first day of Sukkot, the 7 days of Sukkot have one continuous long day halachic status. And therefore, all you do is make one bracha. That is the opinion of the Gemara earlier. So maybe all of these sages concur with that particular opinion, that only one bracha was made in the beginning of Sukkot, and that's why they didn't make a bracha today. It doesn't mean that they don't make a bracha, that they don't treat this day as if it is day 7. Maybe they treat it as if it's day 7. So the Gemara says, no, can be. Because Gemini, because we have a tradition that the sages were the me'afur also. They actually came from the meadow. They came from the meadow. They spent 7 days of Yom Tov in the meadow. Why? I don't know. Why didn't arrange for a sukkah to be made for them in the meadow? I don't know. But this is what the tradition is, that they came from the meadow, which means they didn't have a chance to make the bracha yet. And the only time they would be able to make the bracha would be today, if they were able to. And the fact that they didn't is a clear indication that you don't make a bracha on day 8. Okay. So in conclusion, the Gemara says, the hilchasa, the law is that mesev yosevinon, we dwell in the sukkah on the 8th day. Ruchei loy mevarchinon, but we do not recite the blessing for the mitzvah on the sukkah. We don't recite the blessing. So we dwell on the 8th day, but the blessing is not recited. Again, why is it not recited? Because you want to make a distinction. You want to make a clear distinction that it's day 8, not day 7. If you make the bracha, even though it's a question whether or not it's still Sukkot, but the problem is it may be at the expense of the next day, which is day 8, which is Shemini Atzeret, and Shemini Atzeret has 6 reasons why it's an independent Yom Tov, and therefore, being that it's an independent Yom Tov, you can't make a bracha leishe basukah. You cannot treat it as if it is the Yom Tov of Sukkot still. Even the Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch, after he brings the Tur, he says some have a minhag not to sit in the Sukkah the 8th night. And the reason is because the 8th night, you make a shechianu. You make a shechianu, it's a separate Yom Tov when it comes to several aspects, when it comes to 6 details. If you're making a shechianu, how could you be in the sukkah? Shechianu means there's another new holiday coming up. How could you do it in the sukkah? It's a contradiction. Okay. So now, let's try to understand certain things. When it comes to, so at the end of the day, when it comes to Shemini Atzeret, there's a lot of special things going on. There's a sukkah, there's a question of a sukkah, if we eat in the sukkah. There are other questions. How do we treat it? What's the significance of the day? It certainly is day 8. Whether it's part of Sukkot or not, it certainly has, it's called Yom Shemini Atzeret Lechem. Day 8. 8th day means on the one hand, it's a continuation of 7. On the other hand, it's 8. It's a separate entity. What does 8 mean? What's the significance of 8 in the Torah? Well, in Kabbalistic teachings, the number 7 symbolizes perfection. In other words, perfection that's achievable via natural means, via nature. 8 is symbolic of that which is beyond nature. That which is beyond nature. Because nature is inherently limited. It has a limited perfection. It's part of creation. It's part of nature. 8 supersedes that. That's why the Kli Yakar says something very interesting. The Kli Yakar, when in Parsha Shemini, it says, Bayoim Shemini, the Kli Yakar says, it's Hashem Echad Roichev Al Shiva. That it's Hashem, the one and only Hashem, the one and only God, who rides, who supersedes the natural, who supersedes 7. and it takes that which supersedes 7 to overpower it. He gives an example. For instance, how could you have on Shabbos, which obviously Shabbos, you're not supposed to do malacha, you're not supposed to do any work, you're not supposed to, work would be making an incision, doing surgery and things of that nature. One must not allow themselves to make yourself bleed. You're not supposed to do surgery. Yet, if a child has to be circumcised on Shabbos, it takes place even if it's on Shabbos. How does that come to be? Says the Kli Yakar, because the Brit Milah, a bris, has to do with day 8. 8 supersedes 7. Only something which is 8 can supersede 7. Shabbos, of course, is the epitome of perfection, but it still symbolizes the days of creation. Like Ma Hoya Hoylam Choser, what was the world lacking? It was lacking respite, rest, menucha. Came Shabbos, so respite, menucha, relaxation, rest was given into the world, into creation. So when Hashem created the world, he created the world in the natural 7-day cycle. Another example, between the holiday, between the Yom Tov of Pesach and Shavuot, we have what is called Saphira. We count 7 weeks. During these weeks, we work on perfecting our own 7 emotions. The 7 emotions are love, fear, compassion, ambition, humility, bonding, receptiveness. So we do 1 emotion per week. At the conclusion of these 7 weeks, we basically have sufficiently perfected our emotions 1 at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 day at a time. And at the conclusion of these 7 weeks, we're worthy of receiving the Torah. That's why we celebrate Shavuot after we count the 7 weeks. So again, that's the perfection of our emotions that we have as nature, as human beings. Another example of number 8, the verses 7, the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, served to illuminate the natural world. It was a holy glow of spirituality, but it illuminated the natural world. And it had 7 branches because it dealt with the natural world. There are also 7 colors in the rainbow. I told you I'm going to mention rainbow. There are also 7 colors in the rainbow. There are also 7 musical notes. When something has 7 parts, it symbolizes that it reached a state of completion. So the 7 musical notes of the diatonic scale, that's a 7, each, the complete set of notes have this complete octave resulting because 7 is completion. 8, on the other hand, is symbolic of the entity that's the step above the natural realm, a step above nature, beyond its limitations. And that's why, for instance, Hanukkah is 8 days. Why is Hanukkah 8 days long? Because it symbolizes and represents how the Jewish people, the very few and the weak, overpowered the impossible many. A huge, formidable army was overpowered in an unnatural way. That's why Hanukkah represents 8 days. 8 days. Because they did draw on their faith, on their soul, which supersedes the norm and the natural realm. That's why a person is able to connect and to go beyond what they are normally capable of doing when they connect to their soul. And I must say, I'm reminded that Mendy Goran, Olav Shalom, when he was struggling, he was very sick. He was very sick, yet he would involve himself in certain mitzvot, in particular when it came to building our building, completing our shul. It wasn't easy. It wasn't always easy. The elevator wasn't working yet. He would climb to the second floor. Sometimes he said, I just can't. I can't. But sometimes he would force himself and he would climb to the second floor. And he would do what he normally would not do. He would not do it for himself. But for Kedusha, when it came to a neshama thing, when it came to soul matters, he did draw certain energies beyond himself, like he blew the shofar the last Yom Kippur of his life last year. Where did that come from? Where did that energy come from? So that's the number 8. That's the number 8. When you draw a reservation of faith and courage, it's not part of the normative human nature. So therefore, the Jewish people also, when it came to Hanukkah, they merited that which is beyond nature, a miracle. We also consequently light an 8-branch menorah as a result of that. In a similar vein, we circumcise children, like I mentioned before, also on day 8, because when you're circumcising a child, when he's only 8 days old, he's connecting to Hashem not due to the intellectual understanding that God is great and therefore I have to submit and connect to him. Brit Milah represents that which is beyond comprehension, beyond understanding. It's an 8-day-old child who is connecting to Hashem on an neshama level. That's what 8 represents, beyond the limited human intellect, beyond nature. So that's the number 8. Shemini Atzeret also has that. It's beyond, absolutely beyond the norm. And why do we need a day that's absolutely beyond the norm to be celebrated at this particular juncture? Oh, good question. So here is what we're going to try to deal with and perhaps clarify and wrap things up when it comes to the holiday of Shemini Atzeret, how it comes as a continuation to Sukkot. Because on the one hand, Rashi says that one of the ways of celebrating, one of the reasons why Shemini Atzeret is celebrated is because you don't sit in the Sukkah. Oh, really? So today we also don't sit in the Sukkah. Are we celebrating Shemini Atzeret? It's like any other Wednesday of the year. You're not sitting in the Sukkah. Why are we suddenly celebrating not sitting in the Sukkah? Why is that a celebration? So to answer the different questions that we brought up before, let's wrap things up in the following way. The month of Tishrei is the first month of the year, not only in numbers, but also in importance. And it has a lot of holidays. The holiday that wraps everything up, in other words, and obviously contains everything, is the holiday of Shemini Atzeret and Simchas Torah. And we said before that Hashem asks the Jewish people, please hold back, please don't leave, please don't depart. Wait one more day, where only one korban, one sacrifice is brought, representing the Jewish people, unlike the other days of Sukkot, representing the other nations. So the question is, number one, why does it say, I don't want to see your departure? Just say our departure. And the answer is that it's impossible. Hashem never departs with the Jewish people. The problem is the Jewish people amongst themselves part. And Hashem says, I want you to celebrate a day that will prevent that will give you the energy and the recharge for the entire year, that this will be avoided. You will have the energy to be able to stay together and united amongst yourselves. Because, of course, everything unites us. Rosh Hashanah says, you stand all together today. That's unity. Yom Kippur, what are you kidding? We're all, by Kol Nidre, the Chazan says, we are permitting everyone, even the sinners, to daven amongst us. We don't exclude anybody. Sukkot represents the unity. We take the esrog and the lulav and the hadassim and the aravis, each one representing the good smell and the good taste, and just the good taste, and just the good smell but no taste, and no taste and no smell. And we combine them together, and that becomes one mitzvah representing all different types of Jews in one sukkah. Ruin kol Yisrael leishev basukkah achas. Rashi says, all Jewish people are befitting and worthy of dwelling under one sukkah, so to say. So if that's the case, we have the unity. What's missing? So over here, we said before that we celebrate Shemini Atzeret because we don't sit in the sukkah anymore. We don't sit in the sukkah. How is that a celebration? Because the sukkah, just like the physical sukkah, surrounds us, encompasses us. It represents makif. Remember before we said hakafos? It represents that which surrounds us. It's a little bit of a complex concept, but let's say if a person, learns something and understands it well. If you understand it well, it's like, oh, my brain ingested it. I understood it. It sits well. I comprehend it. So I internalize it. Then sometimes you could have a very lofty, abstract, in-depth concept that's very complex and very complicated to understand. So you're not really internalizing it. You grasp a point. There's a connection. My neshama understands. I get the general gist of it, but I don't fully absorb and appreciate what's going on. That's called makif. That's called, it's hovering over, it's encompassing rather than being absorbed internally. So the light of the sukkah is described as makif, being surrounded. It's beyond. But it's too lofty to internalize. It remains beyond, outside of me. And there's this fear. There's a fear that when Sukkot is over, it's not going to shine anymore. I'm not going to feel the effects of Sukkot. And it's going to be this anticlimactic result, anticlimactic feeling of emptiness. I'm left with that taste in my mouth after all that. So this is what Hashem is saying. Kosha olai pridaschem. Your separation, your departure is what concerns me. It is what's difficult for me to bear. And therefore, let's celebrate a holiday that will prevent these issues. So Shemini Atzeret means it's being absorbed. Atzeret also means kalita. It's being absorbed internally. Shemini Atzeret is supposed to be the holiday that we absorb things internally and we ingest everything in order for us to be able to leave the sukkah back home. And even though everyone returns to their home and ends up doing their own thing, ends up doing whatever they do independently, ultimately they don't remain independent, but they're still connected. That's the energy of Shemini Atzeret. That's the light, and that's the significance of Shemini Atzeret. In other words, the supernal light we have going on Shemini Atzeret and Simchas Torah, which is very interesting. The Torah is covered, and we're dancing with, we're not learning the Torah itself, but we're dancing with it because we're absorbing that which is beyond just the intellectual pursuit. Of course, there has to be intellectual pursuit, but in order to have that flavor, in order to remain connected and inspired and enthusiastic, we have to remember and have this connection beyond nature. 8, we have to connect and remind ourselves who gave the Torah, the giver of the Torah. So over here, we're all dancing together. We're dancing together, and that enables us to bring it home, bring all of that home, to go through the winter, where everyone, especially in Miami, stays in the cold, frigid. When the weather is cold and frigid, everyone has to remain indoors, right? But at least, okay, so not in Miami, but at least conceptually, everyone is busy, everyone is wrapped up doing their own thing, and sometimes you end up not really being sensitive or cognizant of what's going on with other people, or not having that connection. Shemini Atzeret and Simchas Torah, when people come together and dance and absorb the experience of the Yom Tov, the experience of the day, that enables us to bring it home, bring all of that, not in the Sukkah, not outdoors, not a temporary dwelling where you don't have to put a mezuzah because it's only temporary, but you're bringing it home to your permanent abode. Incidentally, I heard an interesting question and explanation. Why is it when it comes to the Yom Tov of Pesach, the child is sitting there by the Seder table and asking 4 questions? Why is this night different to all of the other nights of the year? Yet when it comes to Sukkot, when it comes to the holiday of Sukkot, the child isn't asking questions, when in fact, there's a very, very obvious question. Why we're eating outdoors? We're not in our home. Why are we outdoors? Why are we in a temporary dwelling? And the answer is sometimes sad but true. Throughout history, the Jewish people are used to being in temporary dwellings. They're not at home. And in general, conceptually, we are in our temporary dwelling. Our permanent dwelling is when Mashiach comes. That's the permanent dwelling. So life as we know it now is temporary. It's only a preparation to Shemini, to that which is beyond nature. So therefore, there are no questions asked. The child isn't asking any questions in the Sukkah because it's normal. Everything is temporary. We're all traveling and being thrown around from here to there constantly. So over here, getting back to what we were saying, the days in the winter, where naturally people tend to be locked up, people tend to be closed in, or people tend to just be busy at work and do whatever they tend to be doing independently. Here Hashem says, Kosha alai pridaschem, your departure is difficult for me. That's what the 7 days of Sukkot followed by the 8th day. The 7 days of Sukkot are absorbed because you have the 8th day Shemini Atzeret. You're taking the entire month of Tishrei and you're enabling people to absorb it and take it with them and remember what they experienced. Remember all of that, and remember that we are really connected to number 8. Yes, 7, we have this world to deal with. We have the number 7, we have nature, we have ourselves, our emotions, our environment to deal with and to perfect. But it's all for the sake of bringing number 8, bringing that which is beyond this world, the light, the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, and the strongest possible presence that Hashem has to give us, which is, of course, the coming of Mashiach, the revelation of Mashiach, which will shine in an infinite way that we will hopefully and speedily merit imminently, and we will be reunited with all of those near and dear to us, with Menachem Mendel ben Elchanan and all of the others. We will experience the infinite joy of being reunited once and for all eternally with the coming of Mashiach. Have a wonderful Yom Tov.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Marlow. Much appreciated. Amazing words of Torah. We will be having in the next about 10 minutes from now, we have a special treat all the way live from Eretz Yisrael. We have Rabbi Moshe Rothschild, who will be with us, and we're giving an amazing Dvar Torah about the holiday Sukkot and how that deals with archaeology. Incredible. So stick around, guys. Don't leave.